Okay. Hi, welcome to the National Quiz Choice Save Hyatt with Dr. Hoofman, and he's going to share with us right now about the challenge of energy security. No, sorry, in the 21st century trends of significance. Dr. Hoofman, thank you for joining us here again. What kind of challenges and trends that you see today in terms of energy security for the 21st century? I mean, you have written a wonderful book that's now available for ICES, and could you share with us about the renewable energy pros and cons in terms of the opportunities, and as well as the like electricity, fuels, and markets for heating and cooling?
Well, actually, renewables are of course, good news because the current pattern of energy consumption based on fossil energy, oil, gas, and coal is not sustainable environmentally. As you know, that we are facing a major environmental challenge, i.e., global warming, which is whose main cause is actually emissions of CO2 because of heavy consumption of oil, gas, and coal. And therefore, we need to just find replacement for them. Renewables, including, for instance, wind, solar, hydro, tidal energy, they are all good news because they can actually provide us with some alternative which is not pollutive in terms of emissions of gas. But we have some challenges, some problems at the moment, by that, for instance, solar energy, which is technically good, or also wind, they cannot produce a large scale amount of energy. And therefore, today, because of the low level of the technological advancement in these two fields, we really cannot see them as the main type of replacement for oil and gas. And in any case, the part of the consumption of oil and gas is because of transportation. And therefore, we need to find liquid substitute for oil, for different type of oil, gasoline, or diesel fuel, in order to just significantly decrease the consumption of fossil energy. The alternatives again exist. For instance, it's called biofuels. Biofuels are technically good, but the problem is that the process of production of certain type of agricultural products, such as corn or sugar or sugarcane and other things, are quite destructive for the environment because they require deforestation in part of the region, including, for instance, in Indonesia, which we are fully aware of that, because the forests are clear cut in order to just produce land for cultivation of certain type of agricultural products at a larger scale. So the process of destruction of forests is in itself very destructive, releasing huge amount of CO2s into the air, and also deprive the earth of its lawn, i.e. the trees and all type of greeneries. Then the process of production in terms of watering and also machinery use are again extremely energy intensive, and then again they produce a lot of CO2s which are destructive. At the end, what we have as biofuels, while in a sense that in a comparison sense they are cleaner in terms of emissions when you use them in your car than, for instance, gasoline, diesel fuel. In practice, they are not, because if you add the process of production, then you see that at the end, if you use, for instance, gasoline or diesel fuel, you pollute less because the production is not, the process of production is not as destructive as biofuel is today. At least at the current level of technological advancement for biofuel production, biofuel is not a kind of sustainable type of fuel because of its massive impact on the environment in terms of CO2 and also in terms of the depletion of water resources, because the process is also very water intensive, and so it deprives part of the of its resources of water, the drinkable water, and it also damages the environment because of diversion of water resources from the main habitats into the areas which are used for farming. So this is not a sustainable type of energy at least currently. In the future, perhaps, if other types of production are found, and also, for instance, lands which are not used for lands which are used for production of biofuel are not the lands that actually been clear cut because of destruction of forest. They are perhaps virgin lands, or if the water that used for this production is actually recycled water, if we use compost instead of fertilizers, chemical fertilizers for this, and also if we actually produce biofuels near to the immediate market in order to decrease the emission caused by exports of transportation of biofuel, then perhaps it could be a part of the solution. But currently it is basically biofuels are basically part of the problem, and they have a kind of false promise of providing green alternatives to, for instance, diesel fuels or gasoline. So this is not the way to move on. But when you look at other things, as I mentioned to you, that when it comes, for instance, for electricity generation, while wind and solar are quite good, they should be continued. Again, the production, the electricity productions of these type of energies is very limited, and therefore they really cannot substitute, for instance, coal-fired power generators or gas-fired power generators. And therefore, at best, currently they can be kind of complementary type of operations, keeping in mind that the major part of the operation should remain fossil. So we are still far from the stage that we can actually see renewables as a major type of replacement for fossil energy. Apart from renewables, we have nuclear energy, which is non-fossil but is not renewable. It is actually the only environmentally friendly type of fuel which can actually generate large scale electricity, and it has actually, from my understanding, it should be continued. In Asia Pacific region, it is continuing because of the need for electricity, and also because of the fact that this region is becoming quite pollutive because of heavy consumption of coal, for instance, for the generation of electricity, and therefore, environmentally speaking, it's becoming kind of necessity. So I believe that it will continue in this region, but again, the rate of expansion of nuclear energy is still very insignificant. And therefore, when we look at non-fossil energy, renewables and nuclear, we see that the overall situation is, in fact, proves that if the current situation continues, fossil energy, oil, gas, and coal will remain the dominant type of fuel, which is bad for the environment.
And what is happening with water? Is water fully dependent by the world? Are we running out of water today?
We are not running out of water if we actually change our pattern of consumption. One of the major problems we have is that because of environmental changes, droughts have become quite common, and the global warming is actually speeded up the process of evaporization of water. So we are losing more water because of environmental changes. But what is more important than that is that many of our activities is quite destructive for water resources. For instance, farming has required heavy amount of water, and in many parts of the world, the waters, for instance, drinkable waters, which are good for consumption, they are actually diverted from rivers or lakes or wherever they can find them to the farming region, in particular for biofuel, but it is not exclusive for biofuel. Water is also heavily used for energy production, because just about all types of energy generators, electricity generators, require a type of cooling system, and cooling systems mainly use water as a coolant. And therefore you see that the consumption of water is actually increasing at a phenomenal rate. And in many cases, because we have damaged the environment cannot recuperate it at the scale that we need. So if we continue our wrong pattern of consumption, yes, we will run out of water. But if we just reverse this process and try to be more responsible, then there shouldn't be any problem.
And how much water do we have today that will last us for?
Well, if we stop the global warming, and or at least try to limit it, and over time try to reverse it, I don't think it should be a major problem, provided we actually also do other type of things. In many parts of the world, we have to reforest, because forests do different things. One is cleaning the air, the other is actually collecting moisture, and therefore wherever there is a forest, the overall environment is like more humid, and humidity contributes to rain, and therefore if we actually restore forests in many parts of the world, then we can actually generate more water, and also sustain water, because beneath of any forest there is in a sense a kind of sea of water, because trees also collect water and just push them inside, inject them inside the earth for their own purposes. And therefore reforestation is also a necessity in order to ensure that our water resources will be sufficient, in addition to change of our behavior in terms of production. And also we should also stop polluting waters by dumping garbage, industrial or non-industrial, into water resources, in particular rivers, which have been used extensively everywhere as a type of dumping area for garbage, and it is quite destructive, both for water reasons, depriving us from our water resources, and also for waterborne type of life, including, for instance, the fish.
And what's happening with gas and oil today around the world? I mean, you've spoken about the Middle East earlier, but in other parts of the world, is gas and oil depleting?
Well, yes and no. Some countries, yes, you see that, for instance, even in our region, Indonesia is no longer an OPEC member because it ceased to have the capability to produce oil at the level, at the quotas given to it by OPEC in 2008. So some countries are losing the resources because of heavy consumption and also large export. But at the same time, we have found many new reserves in many parts of the world, oil and gas, especially the offshore oil and gas resources. And therefore, today, when we look at the situation, there is no shortage of oil and gas in terms of reserves. Part of these reserves are, for instance, since they are deep sea reserves, they require very high-tech technologies, and therefore they are quite expensive in terms of production. But the technology is here, and therefore there is no problem in terms of accessing them. As a result, while some countries are losing their resources, other countries are finding new resources, or even some of those formerly the major countries, so even for instance Indonesia, it has also found new reserves. And therefore, at the global level, there is no shortage of oil gas. But perhaps at the local, some countries could be running problems, for instance, in our region, but there is no shortage of suppliers, OPEC or non-OPEC members, in terms of oil, and in terms of gas. There's no shortage of, again, exporters in this region in particular, and also in other regions.
Huh. And what are the key drivers and actors involved in this making of policies and the impact on regulating? What kind of roles these actors would bring and would impact policymakers on and our way of life, such as the role for OPEC, IMF, the World Bank, and ADB. How do these actors and key players bring benefits to the world and the region as well?
The production of energy, oil and gas in particular, are a kind of reaction to the growing consumption. And therefore, there is a consumption everywhere. For that matter, there is demand for this. And therefore, this is the main driving force that's going on. There are, of course, institutes such as, for example, organizations, regional or international, including OPEC, which can actually influence the market. But even in terms of OPEC, its influence has been exaggerated. Today, it actually accounts for 40% of exports of oil, i.e. 60% of oil exporters are non-OPEC members. Some of them have short-term capabilities for export, others have medium-term. And so the reality is, at the end of the day, in the longer term, maybe in 20, 30 years, OPEC will remain as the largest, and perhaps for some, maybe in 30, 40 years, the only major oil exporting organization. But today it is not a major, for instance, actor in terms of pricing, although it has some influence because some of its members, such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, are major exporters of oil, and therefore they have some influence. But other exporters, such as Russia and Norway, which are not OPEC member, they also follow the national interest, and therefore whenever there's a necessity for pushing up prices, they have no problem cooperating with OPEC. So the role of OPEC should not be exaggerated. Other institutions, for instance, IMF, they are not directly involved in oil and gas business. Their policies, for instance, in different countries could actually contribute to increase or decrease of consumption of energy. If, for instance, if they impose austerity programs on a country as a condition for providing assistance, financial assistance, of course, that could actually decrease economic activities and actually, as a result, a kind of reduction in terms of its energy demand. But again, their role should not be exaggerated because at the end of the day, the global economy has been developing at a different paces. There are differences in terms of regional level of growth, and therefore at the end of the day we have been experiencing a pattern of increase in global demand of energy, which is also because of the growing population apart from economic development. And therefore the trend is toward more demand for energy, and there's no question in my mind that this is the trend that we should experience over the next maybe 20-30 years. And therefore this is going to be a major driver for when it comes to energy. Growth of population, growth of economies, a change of pattern of the life of people, improvement of living standards, and the modern life that we have requires a lot of energy for just about everything. So at the end of the day, I think that the growing demand will be the major driver for changes in international energy markets.
What drives the energy cooperation between Asia, Europe, and other continents, even like Africa, the Caribbeans, and South Americas? What's happening right now? Could you give us some insights to these cooperations that's involved, and what is your perspective on Europe? Because Europe right now is heading towards a lot of trouble, in terms of the Eurozone crisis, and it seems to me that most of them are now signing their pact with the United Nations, and how would this change? Because if that is going to happen, do you think the United Nations will become the world government, to govern these issues with Europe, and especially when it comes to energy, and oil?
But I'm not sure what you mean by dealing with United Nations. But United Nations has a different type of mandate. European Union has been facing a problem, and the problem it is actually deep-rooted. It is due to the fact that 27 countries have got together to create this union, but they can be divided into 3, 4, 5 different type of categories in terms of economic might, capabilities, resources. And some members of the European Union, especially new members, for instance, Romania and Bulgaria, they are relatively poor. They are relatively underdeveloped compared to the North European countries such as Germany and the UK and the Scandinavian countries. Some of these European countries are so-called heavyweights. France, Germany, and the UK. They have been the influential forces in the EU. And so we have experienced different type of interests competing with each other, and perhaps on some occasions colliding with each other in terms of overall direction of the Union, the role of different countries, groupings forming and reforming of groupings within the Union, and therefore the European Union, I don't think in the longer term it will be a kind of sustainable type of union as a united union. You can actually create a regional grouping based on some common interests, But turning 27 countries into one country is not going to happen. And actually today we see that it is not happening. You see this economic problem revealing the major problems, economic problem and also social political problem. Many affluent European countries are unwilling to finance less affluent Europeans such as Spain, Portugal, Greece, and other European countries which are suffering from major economic problems. So you see that economic problem shows also political problems and elements of disunity within the Union. So the European Union, I don't think in the longer term will be in a position to act as one superpower, because that was the initial incentive to create a European superpower on par with the US and formerly with the Soviet Union. This is not going to happen, and whether it is going to actually continue in its current form is questionable, because there are elements of disunity, and perhaps if the current situation continues, it is quite possible that some European countries find a way out of the Union as a way out of this problem. So this is the situation of the Europe, and Europe has been very much dependent on imported energy, in particular oil and gas, although it has some limited amount of oil and gas within its territory. For instance, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands have gas, and there's a small amount of oil, for instance, in Norway and other parts of the continent. But mainly it has been highly dependent on imports, particularly from the Middle East and especially from the Persian Gulf. But it has tried to diversify its sources of supply. It has looked at Africa, and the North African countries have been major suppliers of gas, for instance, Algeria, Libya, and also Egypt, also oil in terms of Algeria and Libya. It are also looking at the southern African countries such as Nigeria, which is actually also traditionally been a suppliers, but there are also smaller newcomers such as Angola, which is also capable of exporting some amount of energy to Europe. The EU has been especially interested in the Caspian region, because at the end of when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Caspian region experienced a major change. We've seen the rise of Central Asian and Caucasian countries, of which at least 4 of them are rich in oil and gas. Azerbaijan in the Caucasus, and in Central Asia we have Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. Azerbaijan in particular has attracted EU because of the possibility of direct imports from it, and today Azerbaijan is importing both oil and gas to the European Union through pipelines via Turkey and Georgia. So you see also this growth pattern of growing dependence on the Caspian region for Europe. As a result, Europe has become more involved in the regional politics. It has also been interested in part of Latin America, because Latin America is also rising as a suppliers of energy. Venezuela is a major exporter of oil. But other countries, Colombia, Bolivia, for instance, they are exporters of gas. Brazil has found major the oil and gas reserves, and therefore it is re-rising as a suppliers of oil and gas. So you see that because of energy, but also because of other factors, markets, EU is quite connected to Latin America, to the Caspian region, to Persian Gulf region, the Middle East, and part of North Africa, in addition to, of course, North America, which has been its traditional ally. Of course, when it comes to the Asia Pacific region, it is also interested in this region, but this is not a major supplier of energy for the European Union. So you see that in the longer term, there is some interest on both sides for cooperation, for energy purposes, and also other things, because Europe needs these regions for our markets, for the markets. These regions, housing many emerging economies, they also need Europe for their export. And so there's also this pattern of export-import interest. And I think in terms of global activities, export and import, we should experience some expansion, but the problem is that the EU in general is a declining power, and therefore it is losing its significance in a relative sense as a major attraction for growing economies. Asia Pacific is rising as a major attraction, and therefore many exporting countries, both in terms of energy and non-energy commodities, they are targeting this region, which is affluent, which is growing, and it perhaps is the only part of the world which is capable of continuing its economic growth in the foreseeable future.
And Dr. Human, before we close, though, what advice could you give for policymakers and investors in today's 21st century on energy security? You know, what can they do to make life, you know, easier for everybody? I know that it sounds very difficult, you know, by what we see on the news, based on the trends, you know, and the significance of it. So, could you give us like three points on this?
I can share my views. Whether it is going to be good advice or not, I leave it to your audience. I think that in the longer term, what every investor should keep in mind is that they should invest in non-fossil energy as the way of future, because there's no question that we have to decrease our consumption of fossil energy for environmental reasons, which is going to affect our economic capabilities. It is actually happening in this region, you see. So it is not just a kind of environmental issue, it's also economic issue. But in the meantime, I think I know that there's a need for energy, and fossil energy will be used extensively. I think the diversification of the sources of supply is a necessity, because given the fact that there are many sources of instability in just about all major energy producing regions, one could expect the eruption of such problems at some point in the future, and therefore over-reliance on any one single oil and gas producing region is a mistake for any type of investment. And investment should be diversified. It should be divided into among different countries with different types of significance in terms of energy. And so my point is that over-reliance should be avoided, and diversification should be the key word for the future.
Well, Dr. Human, thank you for joining us here at the National Critics' Choice Save Hyatt. And please, everyone, about this book, The Challenge of Energy Security in the 21st Century, Trends of Significance, edited by Dr. Human Peymani, is available at all leading bookstores around the world, even online. Or you can actually log on to www.bookshop.iseas.edu.sg for more information. And thank you for joining me here at the National Critics' Choice Save Hyatt. I'm Robin Stienberg.
Thank you.
I hope it's not difficult.